Okay, that's interesting. So he lost power. Lisa, did he let you know that he lost power? Okay, It does. Oh, the whole neighborhood is out. Yeah, this is very interesting. Very interesting. Very interesting event. Oh no. Okay, well, I guess everybody can unmute and we can kind of we can kind of talk about what we've seen so far, but it wouldn't be right if we talked about it without Scott, would it? What do you guys think? Wonder how long he's going to be out for. Oh, okay, that's a good idea. So maybe he can just call in and yeah, that's a great idea. He can call in, we can just talk to him. Excellent idea. Wow. Yes, this is a very, very interesting. We even had a horror cat fight. That was my upstairs neighbors. You're right. You're right. Cell phones never work. Yes, my neighbor's upstairs cat came downstairs and found my cat, and they had a tete-a-tete. And Julie's cat got very excited. All right. Scott is coming in. Hi, Scott. You're muted. Muted.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, what a day. Well, there we go. So we're having huge storms in California right now. And major fire worries, I guess, because of these wonderful Sirocco's that have decided to come out. And it looks like our power went. Who would have ever thought? I guess I need a generator to do these things.
And you missed our cat fight. I have a cat, and the cat upstairs came down, and the two of them just had a wonderful fight.
Oh, wonderful. So this is just the kind of stuff that you record video for, right? This is going to be for the live, for the bookstore, far beyond anything else. So I'm in the dark here, but I am willing to talk to anybody and everybody about things. I'm so sorry, folks. I hope you enjoyed what you saw.
Yes. Okay. People can unmute themselves.
It's great so far.
It's good so far. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm not sure when I'll be able to put it back on. We need, unfortunately, we need internet to be able to share the screen in that way. I don't have it on my phone, or I'd put it on my phone. But I don't know. Does anybody have any questions about the goofiness that you saw? We're about to get into the nitty gritty, which is basically the whole concept of why I have the manifesto in the first place.
Well, Kevin Marr had said something in the chat when you were talking about The Shining, and no, when you're talking about Platoon and Full Metal Jacket, that it was a similar story with Grapes of Wrath and Day of the Locust.
Yeah, well, Day of the Locust especially. I mean, that's talking about Hollywood, but it's really talking about our culture. And in the end of Day of the Locust, there's a very famous celebrity get together for an awards ceremony with all the lights and everything outside of a big theater, and there's people who are trampled to death. It becomes this thing of where looking towards celebrity, people become almost like beasts, and they do become beasts. They end up killing a young girl, and I'm trying to remember who else might. But it's a really amazing story and an amazing film, because at that moment the camera goes into close up on the Klieg lights, those big lights that you see that go across the sky, and so the people start looking insect-like, Day of the Locust, in other words, and so they're almost inhuman at that point. So there is a very disturbing horror movie feel to that film, especially if you look at it as what do they want you to go home with. Out of all the things, of all the different ways that they could tell that story, John Frankenheimer decided that he needed to show that visual in that setting, in that milieu, with those horror movie tropes, and that's one of the things that you'll see a lot in film. Will decry, people will poo-poo horror, but they continually use visual images and the way that editing is done. That comes from horror films again and again and again. And of course, that also is German Expressionism. I mean, in a way, they're going back to German Expressionism. They're using that thing of taking the internal emotions and drawing them out and visually showing them as tableau. And it interests me. I love, I did a quick shot of the quote unquote dinner theater moment in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where they have a woman who's tied to a chair at the table, and all the crazy folk are at the table looking at her, and the camera's at her point of view. So we are seeing what she's seeing, and there's all these people sneering and everything. And, you know, that movie's notorious, but it's amazing how much the visual language of film was changed by this really low budget film. You will see their use of shadow light, light coming through fans, just the way that we look at people, if we're looking at like the crazy redneck culture war, you will get so many of the ideas of our fear of the other from that movie. There's so much of the visual impact that movie made that you can see in even straight drama. CSI, all of those shows owe so much to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They'd never know it, but at the same point, that movie really kind of invented that has been used again and again and again in true crime, especially. True crime shows, documentaries, tend to ape Tobe Hooper's movie. So, yeah, as you can see, we may not have video. We may have lost our movie, but I can talk a blue streak.
Does anybody else have any questions? I'd like to hear a little bit more about your book, because I'm from Annie's Book Stop of Worcester, and we're the ones that are actually basically sponsoring this, and we can order your books. We can we can get your books for anybody that's interested, and we do mail order, so you can order them from us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And so just to give us a little plug, but I want to hear more about your book.
Of course. Well, thank you first off for that plug. And it really is one of those things that I love bookstores, and I'm so glad that you're able to talk to this, because of course there's always the big bookstores, but I love that anybody can go on my website, and I have the ISBN numbers, and if they want to go to their independent bookstore anywhere near them, those are the people that I champion. You guys were there for me back when I didn't have the ability to express myself any other way. There's a chapter in the book that's all about reading, the joys of reading, and that's really the first place that I get corrupted. You know, is in the bookstore, in the library. It's the quiet revolution. As many people who are readers know, you can basically be on the bus, on the subway, And you can be reading some of the most sordid stuff right next to somebody and they don't know it. But you have the ability to express and allow yourself to go down these passages and learn new worlds in a very safe way. And I will say that for me, books were super important. And this is a chapter in the book that basically talks to how much books were the first place that I was released from a pretty oppressive childhood. I was brought up in a cult, basically. I was in a fundamentalist Christian cult that thought that the world was going to end in 1975. And so I was not allowed to do a lot of things that I do these days because of that, like celebrate Halloween and things such as. But in that, one of the things that was a saving grace for me, because I was really ostracized as a kid, I was isolated. When you are the person who decries every belief that people have because your crazy religion says that you need to do that to save people's souls, you end up sitting alone in the playground. Let's just put it that way. So what I ended up doing was I found books, and I had a very strict upbringing. And the Bible was pretty much the book that everything came from. I was lucky in one way. My dad realized that I loved to read. And that because I was alone, I had a lot of time to do that. My dad was also functionally illiterate. And so he didn't look at books the same way as I did. My dad only looked at books as homework. And this was the way that I was able to subvert his oppressive lookout for me. So I wasn't allowed to watch movies for the most part, except for ones that were kind of what I call court approved by him and my mom. So how did I get to learn about the world? Well, my dad thought it was a complete impossibility that I wanted to read, that I wanted to go and get homework basically at the library. So he got me a library card, and I was able to take home 7 books at a time. And in that, I found the things that allowed me to get outside of that thumb, realize that there's a bigger world. And I think that's what books allow us to do. They do go to the transgressive side. I think you have to go to the transgressive side to grow. Because a lot of us are oppressed in some ways. And it doesn't mean that we have to dance forever in the transgressive side, but we need to know it exists. We need to know that we're not going to die if we get near it. And so what ended up happening with me was the first thing was like an Ellery Queen, not an Ellery Queen, it was The Saint. I can't remember who the author was who did the Saint books, but I opened up this book and it just said he broke his neck with the sound of a dry twig. And I was like, what? Oh my goodness, that's the most insane thing I've ever read. And I was completely compelled by that. I wanted to see Jaws. My dad wouldn't let me see Jaws, but he let me read the book because he thought everything was homework. He had no idea that there were these amazing sex scenes in the book. I mean, it is a boring, bland, terrible book, but there's an amazing sex scene with Brody's wife and oh my God, I'm forgetting Hooper. And so that and a couple other books, I started to realize that I was able to scratch an itch that I didn't even know I really had. But what really ended up happening was I was able to debunk the beliefs through books. What books did for me is what horror movies did later, and especially horror books. I had these thoughts in my head already. I had these terrible images in my brain, these doubts about this God that was supposed to do all this stuff, this doubt about this religion that allegedly loved people and hated people at the same time. All of these weird doubts that I couldn't articulate, but a book would allow me to. And what that did is it took the things that were in my head and I heard them out loud. I saw them out loud on paper. And if it was on paper, that meant more than one person believed this. Another person felt like I felt. I had books telling my stories, talking about my doubts. And it was really Harlan Ellison's, again, Dangerous Visions. And that was an edited, he just edited it, but it was basically an omnibus of stories. And they were stories from science fiction writers who were thoroughly frustrated by the draconian editing that was going on in the very few bookstores or magazines that would publish their work. The Asimovs, and actually, I think Popular Mechanics used to do science fiction stories. So they were not allowed to go outside of the lines. And basically Ellison said, fuck that. I want to make this book. And I'm sorry about that profanity. I'm not sure. Sorry, Annie's book. I'll try not to do that. Screw that. We want to, I want to give you guys carte blanche. Give me the story that they won't allow you to print. Let's just shout this stuff from the end, because the idea of the censorship of us is ridiculous. And so, I mean, if you look at the book now, it's a little bit dated. I mean, some of the stuff that's in there is, shall we say, very of the time, the 60s. So it's a little hippy dippy. It may not translate as well, but there are certain things that are in that book that really saved me. And Ray Nelson's Time Travel for Pedestrians is the short story that kind of changed my life. It's all about a guy who takes drugs and he time travels while he's on acid. And he time travels to all these different historical moments where he's basically confronting deity. He's confronting religion. He's confronting the Moors at the time, and he dies every time in horrible, horrible ways. And in the end, he's up against the archangel with the flaming sword, and he wrestles that angel down, and he kills it, and he takes a sword, and he just starts to point in different directions. He goes, where will I go? And that was like the most freeing thing that could have happened for me. I was like, wow, I just read this. I didn't die. And this is so much of what I believe. Like, there was this one line that was so important to me at that point when I was so shackled by the religion. It was a line that Mary Magdalene allegedly was saying. There's this part of the story where he was one of the scribes that's running around. Christ has just been killed. Everybody's trying to get an exclusive with the 12 apostles. And so everybody's got an exclusive with the apostles. He goes after Mad Mary of Magdala. And when he meets her, he says, I want to write this. And she goes, you want to write a book about Jesus? You know, he came to release us from a book, right? And I was like, wow, what an amazing thing to say, especially as a book. And it was just so freeing for a person like myself who felt oppressed. So horror has done that. The Exorcist was another book that was big for me because my family believed that demons were right next to my shoulder all the time, waiting for me to screw up. And so having that book was like basically committing every sin possible and thumbing your nose at the devil, hoping that you get stabbed in the head. Of course, I didn't want that to happen, but I took the book home and I was so terrified I was going to be possessed by the time I woke up. And I woke up and I wasn't possessed. Yeah. And it was like, wow, okay, what is real and what is for me to make decisions about? And books allow you to do that in all sorts of ways. And so there are books, that aren't horror books, like A Prayer for Omini, that I think is truly a significant book in my life. My goodness, I could go on so many others. Selena, I don't want to tax it too much. I know I'm talking a lot, but I think there might have been questions. I'm on my phone and I don't want to touch anything because I'm afraid it's going to crash. But are there questions or are there comments that I need to address?
There are some questions in chat. I don't know if you've looked.
I'm trying to look at it. I'm afraid I'm going to crash if I look.
Oh, okay. Let's see. There are a few from Kevin, and there's Kevin said, "What's the best horror book you've read this year, new or old?" And he said Ray F. Nelson wrote the story "They Live" is based on, and he also invented the propeller beanie. You're muted.
Wow, I'm muted and I had no clue. Okay, so yes, 8 o'clock in the morning is the Ray Nelson story that They Live, John Carpenter's They Live is based on. And I had no idea about the beanie. So I love how intelligent the folk are that decide to talk about horror with me. The best book of the year. There's two. What I want to do is I want to talk about one that actually came out last year that I read last year, but I reread again because I really loved it. It was Paul Tremblay's Cabin at the Edge of the World. And that is just a magnificent book. It angers people. But of course, knowing a little bit of my backstory, you probably realize why that book was so important to me, because it really talks about faith, and it talks about where we are right now as a culture divided. And it doesn't give good, simple answers. So I really like Tremblay's book. But there's also Afterland by Lauren Bucas. I just finished it. And it's more of a science fiction story, but it still has very much horror elements to it. And Bucas has made books like the Shining Girls and Broken Monsters, which I highly recommend. Broken Monsters. But Afterland is kind of like Children of Men meeting a adventure book and a horror story. So what happens in that book is there is a disease that basically allows, or something genetically turns on, that kills most of the men in the world. It's prostate cancer. Prostate cancer just runs rampant. And for people who are young, children are getting prostate cancer that are males. So something like 85% of the males in the world die. And we're now in a matriarchy, but we're in a matriarchy that is full of grief. And this is a story of a woman who is trying to keep her son safe. And he's about 12 years old, and she's passing him off as a girl. And he was held in a government facility because, of course, when you only have so many men left, everyone is a valuable thing. And the government takes them and takes their lives from them and keeps them safe. And so the mom decides they need to escape. And part of that has to do with a duplicitous sister of the mother who gets them involved in all sorts of stuff. But what really radiates in that story so much is how, especially we're in a pandemic, right? This book really resonated because I'm reading it during this, but it's not about pandemic. It's about the idea of being humbled by something that can take down nations, that has nothing to do with whether you're good or you're bad, but how, when we are going through all this, we go to the emotions of good and bad, that we are trained by whatever our culture says, whatever our religions say, that if this kind of things happen, we have somehow brought it upon ourselves. So there is this entire, and that's a little Handmaid's Tale in this story as well. There is this religion of women that are penitents, basically. They wear these bright colored saris, and they basically talk about being sorry all the time. They are apologencias. And their thing is to basically physically harm themselves to bring the men back. And they believe that this comes from original sin. They revert back to the oldest of Old Testament beliefs. But there are no men. So it is led by women abusing women. And it's it gets really disturbing, really scary, but really heartfelt. There are moments where they're just walking, they're driving through the wastelands of the world, and they come across a boys' school, a very rich kind of the academy that John Irving went to. I'm forgetting what one is in New Hampshire, but these beautiful places, these palaces to men, right? It's an all boys school. And when the women are there walking through it, they just start wailing. They remember what they've lost. And that is the feeling that goes through the book. There's almost like this thing where women are packing, with revolvers and stuff, because something happens when women see the one remaining man in a place. They may tear him apart. It's not out of anger. It's like this strange animalistic thing that happens. And Lauren Bucas writes some really interesting, pointed stuff in that book. So I highly recommend Afterland. It may not be like directly up the path of horror, but I highly recommend that one. And I think everybody knows that I have a pretty I was actually looking for my phone. I forgot. I'm on the phone because I was going to say there's another book that I'm reading right now that is a short story group, and I'm trying to remember the name of the author. Steve Resnick Tem, I believe is his name, and I think it's called Unseen Things. I think it's called Unseen Things. And there are some really interesting short stories in there, one of which had to do with the poor suddenly starting to appear to this doctor, and they just call them the poor. And he is being told that he's supposed to do all these things by the poor for them. And he's like, they know more about my business than I do. And he's getting nothing from the government. And it just becomes this thing where suddenly they start living in his house. They start living in the trunk of his car. All this crazy stuff. It's incredibly surreal, but it's about the idea of being inactive in what's happening in society. And you are afraid that you're going to become these things, so you don't say anything about what's going on. And he does it in a very fantastical way. There are stories about things like a woman who gets obsessed with combs and brushing her hair. And so I love when people start going down that fantastical thing. They start talking about our proclivities and our weirdness. And horror is really all about, at its best, for me at least, when it's metaphor and parable, when it starts talking about these things about us that if you started talking about vanity, people might turn off. But if you talk about vanity in the way that a woman is suddenly, combs start appearing all over the house, really expensive combs, and she wakes up, they're in her hair and things. Funny, and yet I know where they're going with that. And I think that's a high point of imagination. So hopefully some of those are interesting points for you.
Scott, it's Kevin. Can I ask you a question? Can you hear me?
Hi, Kevin.
Hello. So good to see you. Something occurred to me while you were talking about the book and the idea of the matriarchy as part of the speculative fiction. Last night I watched Destroy All Monsters for the first time, the kaiju film from 1968 with Godzilla and many, many monsters. And I noticed it's another kaiju movie where super intelligent, super powerful, advanced aliens come to Earth, and they are women. They are lady aliens who come in. And it made me wonder, and I thought maybe you'd know, is that a motif in Japanese monster movies where the villains are strong and powerful women? And what does that say about that set of audiences and their fears?
Right. Well, I think you're right on spot with that. I'm not sure. You know, some of these things, not to go back too much to Tobe Hooper, but I think Tobe Hooper was this crazy weird genius. One of the things that he said was, you know, you make movies and you don't know what they're really about for 20 years, and then you find out. So I think that what happens is artists aren't in a vacuum. They are part of the collective anxiety, and they come up with ideas that are from the collective anxiety, like Them and Giant Ants and Giant Tarantula movies and all that, right after the atom bomb blows off. And then it's not just us. Other people have the bomb. All of a sudden, we start worrying about that Pandora's box that we've opened. So looking at how Japanese culture was and is around women, the idea of, and you know, there's also a kind of a little bit of a weird kink that goes on with domination as well in the Japanese culture. But the idea of men being the strong patriarchy and women being, you know, down to the point of submissive or diminutive in the culture. I think when you have the monster being these strong women, it's interesting to me that it's kind of a mixture of, oh, these are the fears. We fear women, but there's also, it's kind of a turn on to have women be in a way strong and dominant. So they're super intelligent, right? They're super powerful. They don't look bad. There's all that stuff that's also being put in. So they're not like, say, Nicholas Roeg's The Witches, right? Where they're strong, powerful women, but they pull off their face and they're ugly and cronish and nasty and they're evil. And so you know that you're supposed to be frightened of them. But in the kaiju films, they're actually somewhat attractive and they're intimidating by that strength. And it's kind of like that uber woman, Wonder Woman kind of thing that goes on in kink. So it's an interesting thing that you bring up there, and I'm sure that has to do with the culture. My honest opinion is that even the worst B movies that are horror movies cannot help but comment on the culture and the time that they are made, because they are made to tweak our anxiety. So they need to know what we're afraid of. So in the time of The Exorcist, you know, when we're afraid of our kids running amok, we're also noticing that the religious and all major foundations of our culture are crumbling, and especially religion. We have this movie that talks about, you know, the heroes are priests. You know, it's not two cowboys walking, it's not the sheriff, it's two priests. And you have this girl that is doing all these horrible, horrible things. Some of the most obscene stuff is done on a spiritual plane in a horror film. And after that, every movie is starting to talk about that stuff. There's a million drive-in movies that are talking about that. There are drive-in movies that are talking about the sexual revolution, rape revenge films like I Spit on Your Grave, you know, tawdry stuff. And yet it's happening because we're anxious about something. It is commenting on what we think of women and equal rights, whether we're pro or con. And that's the thing that's very interesting about horror. It's talking about the things that we don't really want to articulate. It's that thing that's happening in the background. It's that thing that one guy at the bar that you can't stand is thinking, but you're also thinking it, but you may be on the opposing side. Horror has to find that ground to be effective. And that's what it's there to do. It does its own exorcism. How's that for an answer?
That was terrific. Thank you.
Anyone else? And thank you. And I'm so sorry that the movie didn't work. I didn't expect there to be a power outage. So
You planned it, didn't you?
I wanted to look this way. I thought this is like, I'm in a bunker now. It kind of fits.
Okay, if no one else has any questions, I think that's probably it. Anybody?
I want to thank everybody.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank you for joining us, and it was great. I mean, I think everybody had a great time. Yeah, I think the mix-ups and everything really kind of added to it. But maybe someday we'll get to see. Maybe someday we'll get to see the whole thing.
I hope so. If there's any possibility to reschedule and do it again, I'd be more than happy to. Or if you'd like to have it somewhere on, if you want to have a recording of it, I can certainly work that with you in the background to have.
Okay, that would be great. Yeah, I would like to actually. Sounds good. Okay, thanks very much, and thanks everybody for coming. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.